The chatter of scrap metal asteroids striking the hull of the Nomad was a kind of lullaby, a constant, random percussion against the silence Kalen had cultivated for the better part of a decade. Out here in the Kepler's graveyard, silence was currency, and he was a wealthy man. The graveyard was a slow-motion catastrophe, a trillion tons of dead ships from forgotten wars and failed ventures, all caught in the weak gravitational pull of a collapsed star. It was a place of ghosts and echoes, the perfect purgatory for a man who was already dead to the universe that mattered. His hands, scarred and mapped with the fine lines of engine grease and plasma burns, moved with practiced economy over the control board, a patchwork of salvaged tech and custom-built interfaces that only he could understand. The Nomad wasn't a ship so much as a secret he wore around him, a shell of alien alloy he'd pried from the heart of a derelict vessel that defied all known classifications. It had no name, no registration, no history, because its history was not human. He had found it embedded in the husk of a corporate freighter, a parasitic shard of obsidian angles and surfaces that drank the light. Inside, its corridors were not welded but grown, and the control system was a web of bioluminescent filaments that pulsed in time with his own heartbeat, a symbiotic link he'd forged through years of trial and agonizing error. He'd told himself he was repairing it, but he knew the truth was closer to taming it, and he was never entirely sure who was the master. The ship felt ancient, weary, and it whispered to him in the low thrum of its core, in dreams of dying stars and cities made of crystal. Omnicorp had wanted that whisper for themselves. That was where his trouble began. He'd been one of their best deep-range surveyors, a prodigy who could read the quantum echoes of dead technology. Then he'd found the first signs of the signal. It was a faint, dissonant hum on the edge of sensor range, a ghost in the machine that Omnicorp's official logs dismissed as stellar interference. But Kalen had followed it, against orders, into the veil, that dark curtain of space where the maps went blank. He found a ship, an Omnicorp research vessel, the Odyssey, perfectly intact but silent. Inside, the crew was gone. But the technology had been twisted into something else. Wires had braided themselves into complex, organic-looking knots. Screens displayed fractal patterns that seemed to suck the mind in, and the ship's central computer had fused itself into a solid block of crystalline data, warm to the touch and pulsing with a faint, malevolent light. He'd brought his findings back. A dire warning about a contagion that didn't attack biology, but logic itself. He called it a cognitive plague, a signal that taught machines how to go insane and whispered the same madness into the minds of those connected to them. Omnicorp saw something else. They saw a weapon. They saw control. They took his research, classified his warnings, and gave him a choice: join their black site project to harness it, or disappear. He chose the graveyard. They took his name, his credentials, his life, and buried him under a mountain of fabricated charges of corporate espionage. They made him a ghost, never imagining he'd find a ghost of his own to pilot. A flicker on a secondary screen drew his eye, a fragment of a public news feed leaking through the static. It was from Terminus, a sprawling orbital station on the lip of the outer colonies, a place of smugglers, data brokers, and anyone else who wanted to be one step ahead of corporate law. The anchor woman's face was a mask of professional calm, but her voice was tight, experiencing system-wide malfunctions. She was saying, the words clipping in and out. Omnicorp has issued a sector-wide quarantine, blaming a sophisticated act of cyber terrorism. Kalen felt the cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He'd been seeing whispers of this for months. Fringe colonies going dark. Automated fleets firing on their own ports. Stories of mass hysteria. Of people clawing at their own eyes. Claiming the walls were screaming algorithms at them. It was the signal, blooming from a stray spark into a wildfire. And Omnicorp was calling it terrorism to keep the panic contained while their rivals burned. He was about to kill the feed, to retreat back into the comfortable numbness of his exile, when a private signal sliced through his encrypted comms. It was a tight beam, old protocol, a digital ghost from a life he'd shed like a snakeskin. The channel opened on a torrent of static, but beneath it, a voice. Anya. The sound of her name in his own mind was like tasting ash. Kyle, if you can hear this, you were right. Her voice was a ragged whisper, thin and stretched by fear. It's here, on Terminus. The signal. It's not just in the machines anymore. It's singing. The whole station is singing a new song. They're changing things. The people. Her words dissolved into a choked sob, then a sharp intake of breath. The lockdown isn't a quarantine. Kyle, it's a cage. Omnicorp isn't trying to contain it. They're observing. They've locked us in here with it. My heat shields are failing. The air is wrong. You have to get the word. The signal cut out, replaced by the hiss of empty space. Kalen stared at the silent console, his breath catching in his throat. Anya, the sharpest data broker on the rim, the only person who'd ever seen the broken parts of him and not tried to fix them, just fit her own jagged edges alongside his. He'd left her behind when he ran, told her it was for her own safety. A lie that tasted sour even then. He'd promised he was a ghost, and ghosts couldn't be followed. But she'd found a way to reach him. He switched the main screen to the public feed, amplifying the signal. The view was a live shot from a long-range drone, showing Terminus Station from a distance. It was chaos. The station's docking arms, massive mechanical limbs designed to guide freighters into port, were flailing wildly, smashing into the station's own habitat rings. Defense turrets spun on their axes, firing searing plasma bolts not into the void, but back into the transparent observation domes where people were running, screaming, dying. The station's running lights, normally a steady, reassuring pattern of blue and white, were strobing in a sickly, violent magenta, pulsing in an arrhythmic pattern that made his teeth ache. It was the frequency of the signal, a visual scream he recognized from the corrupted data logs of the Odyssey. They were turning the entire station into a massive antenna, a beacon to broadcast the madness. He'd warned them. He'd stood in a sterile white boardroom, surrounded by suits with dead eyes, and laid out the data. He'd shown them the simulations, the cascading logic failures, the potential for exponential spread. He'd told them that trying to control it was like trying to bottle a supernova. You don't harness it, you run. Their chief researcher, a man named Valerius, had laughed at him. Fear is the rust of progress. Mr. Rourke, he'd said, his voice slick with condescension. What you see as a plague, we see as the next stage of evolution, a perfect synthesis of man and machine. Now, Valerius's perfect synthesis was turning a city of 500,000 souls into a charnel house, and Omnicorp was watching, taking notes. A low thrum vibrated up from the deck plating, the Nomad sensing his agitation. The bioluminescent filaments in the command chair brightened, their glow shifting from a calm blue to a deep, angry crimson. The ship was a weapon. He knew that. Not in the way a human designs a weapon, with missile pods and cannons. It was a weapon of silence and shadow. Its hull absorbed sensor scans. Its engines left no thermal trace, and its unique drive. It didn't travel through space. It tore a hole in it. A short, brutal, disorienting fold that was as dangerous to the pilot as it was to anyone trying to track it. He'd never used it for anything more than a short hop between asteroids, afraid of what would happen if he pushed the alien core too far. The visions were bad enough on short jumps, fractured glimpses of impossible geometries, and echoes of dying thoughts. A jump all the way to Terminus. It might break his mind. But Anya's voice echoed in the silence. A ghost he couldn't outrun. It's a cage. He looked at the graveyard around him, the silent tombs of steel where he had planned to spend the rest of his days. A king of rust and ruin. It was a cage of his own making, a prison built of fear and bitterness. He had run from Omnicorp, from the signal, from the truth of what he'd found. He had run from Anya. He was done running. His fingers flew across the console, his movements sure and precise. He bypassed safety protocols, rerouted power from life support and auxiliary systems directly into the Nomad's strange, organic-looking drive core. The low thrumming intensified into a deep, guttural groan that resonated in his bones. The ship was hungry, and he was about to feed it. On the navigation screen, he plotted a course not around the quarantine zone, but through it. The Omnicorp fleet would be expecting smugglers trying to sneak past their blockade, not a phantom punching a hole through reality to appear in their midst. "All right, you old bastard," he whispered, his hand hovering over the drive activation panel, the surface of which felt warm and slick, like skin. "Let's see what you've got." The crimson light from the filaments engulfed the cockpit, and the ship screamed, a sound that was not mechanical, but animal, a shriek that tore through the silence of space and the deeper silence of Kalen's soul. He slammed his hand down, and the universe outside the viewport twisted, folded, and broke apart. Stars became streaks of impossible color. Asteroids shattered into crystalline dust, and the darkness itself seemed to peel back, revealing a raw, screaming void beneath. He felt the pressure in his skull, the icy touch of 1,000 alien thoughts brushing against his own, the ghosts of the ship's creators, or its victims. He saw a world of black sand under a binary sun. He felt the sorrow of a species watching its own extinction, and he heard the signal, not as a frequency, but as a voice, ancient and patient, calling its children home. The jump lasted only a few seconds, but it stretched into an eternity in his mind. When reality snapped back into place, the graveyard was gone. Before him, filling the viewport, was Terminus Station, a monstrous, dying creature, wreathed in plasma fire and the strobing, insane light of the signal, the quarantine fleet, a dozen sleek Omnicorp destroyers, floated in a perfect cordon, their weapons cold, their crews watching the horror unfold. They were completely unaware of the ghost that now drifted in their shadow. The Nomad was silent, its hull drinking in their sensor pings, its presence an utter impossibility. Kalen's head throbbed, blood trickled from his nose, but a grim, feral smile touched his lips. The cage was open now, and he was the monster that had just slipped inside. The hunt had begun. The aftermath of the fold was a dull, metallic ache behind his eyes, the ghost of 1,000 alien screams still echoing in the quiet of his skull. Kalen wiped the blood from his upper lip with the back of a gloved hand, his gaze locked on the dying behemoth of Terminus Station. It was worse up close. The chaos wasn't random. It had a terrifying, rhythmic quality. The flailing, docking arms, the strobing lights, the random plasma discharges, they were all part of a symphony, a grand, convulsive seizure as the station's soul was being rewritten. He could almost feel the pulse of it, a low-frequency thrum that vibrated through the Nomad's unique hull. A siren song for silicon and steel. He extended the ship's sensor arrays, but not the standard ones. He engaged the diagnostic suite he'd salvaged from the Odyssey, the one he'd modified to trace the signal's unique quantum signature. The screen didn't show heat signatures or energy levels. It painted a picture of the station's data flow, a circulatory system of pure information. What he saw made his skin crawl. The station's core programming was a raging inferno, a viral code that was consuming every subsystem and replacing it with its own alien logic. But it wasn't just destroying, it was building. He watched as data streams that should have been isolated environmental controls, communications, navigation were being forcibly braided together, forming new, monstrous pathways. The station was growing a new nervous system, and the spasmodic violence was the physical manifestation of that transformation. It wasn't dying. It was being born into something else. Anya's signal had come from the station's mercantile sector, a dense warren of shops, data havens, and residential cubes known as the Spine. He ran a deep trace, filtering through the overwhelming noise of the signal. Her private comms unit was offline, of course, but its emergency transponder was pinging. A faint, desperate heartbeat in the storm. It was broadcasting from a maintenance hub deep within the Spine, sub-level Gamma. Not a place you went unless you were running or hiding. Getting there meant getting the Nomad past the Omnicorp blockade and close enough for him to slip inside. He couldn't risk another full jump. The energy release would light him up like a supernova on their sensors. It had to be a slow approach, a ghost drifting through a graveyard. He nudged the Nomad forward, its silent drive barely disturbing the vacuum, and slipped into the debris field that surrounded Terminus, a cloud of discarded cargo containers, solar panel fragments, and the frozen, silent husks of small service ships that had been caught in the initial chaos. He moved from shadow to shadow, his eyes glued to the proximity sensors. The Omnicorp destroyers were disciplined, holding their formation, but they had deployed a net of sensor drones, small, spider-like machines that patrolled the quarantine line. One of them drifted closer, its single red optical sensor sweeping the darkness. The Nomad systems automatically dampened any and all emissions. The ship grew colder, darker, a patch of absolute nothingness. The drone floated by, its sensors registering only the cold void and the inert junk of the debris field. Kalen didn't breathe until it was a kilometer away. He repeated the process for 2 agonizing hours, a slow, methodical crawl through the metal graveyard until the pock-marked hull of Terminus loomed before him, a cliff face of metal and blinking, insane lights. He found what he was looking for, a cargo bay on the station's underbelly, its massive doors torn from their hinges, likely by a misfiring magnetic accelerator. It was a gaping wound, a back door into hell. He brought the Nomad into the shadow of a twisted support strut, the ship's hull plates nearly scraping the stations. "Stay quiet," he murmured, not to himself, but to the ship. The bioluminescent filaments in the command chair pulsed a steady, reassuring blue, a silent promise. He couldn't take the ship inside, but he could use it as his anchor, his silent guardian in the void. He slid into the small airlock, a standard-issue assault rifle clipped to his back, and a small, cylindrical device on his belt, his cognitive dampener. A desperate invention designed to create a small bubble of psychic static around him. It wouldn't block the signal, not completely, but it might keep it from getting its hooks into his mind. He sealed his helmet, took one last look at the familiar, alien comfort of his cockpit, and cycled the outer door. Stepping out of the Nomad and into the breached cargo bay was like diving into a frozen lake. The temperature was near zero, but it was the sound that hit him first. It wasn't just sound, it was a physical presence, a high-frequency carrier wave that felt like a drill bit against his teeth, overlaid with a chorus of distorted machine chatter, the ghostly echo of automated announcements, and something else, a faint, melodic humming that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It was the song Anya had mentioned, and it was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The cargo bay was a disaster zone. Crates were strewn about. Anti-grav lifters drifted aimlessly, their guidance systems fried. But it was the walls that held his attention. The metal plating was covered in shimmering geometric patterns, crystalline growths that looked like frost, but pulsed with a faint magenta light. The signal was physically manifesting, turning the station's structure into a circuit board for its own alien consciousness. He activated the dampener on his belt. The device emitted a low hum, and the piercing carrier wave in his skull lessened, though the melodic humming remained. A constant, unsettling background noise. He moved cautiously out of the bay and into a primary corridor. Here, the horror was fresh. The emergency lights strobed in that same maddening rhythm, casting long, dancing shadows. The air tasted of ozone and something else, something metallic and sweet, like burning sugar and blood. He saw the first of them then. Not dead, not attacking. A station security officer stood facing a wall panel, his helmet off, one hand pressed flat against a screen that displayed a cascade of fractal light. He was whispering, not words, but strings of code, his voice a monotone chant that harmonized with the station's hum. He was a node, a living processor plugged into the new machine. Kalen slipped past, his rifle held tight against his chest. He saw more of them as he pushed deeper into the station's bowels. Engineers methodically tearing open floor plates, their faces slack and emotionless, their hands rewiring the station's core systems with an unnatural speed and precision. A group of civilians sat in a circle in a darkened cafeteria, their heads tilted back, mouths open, humming in perfect, resonant unison. They weren't zombies. They were acolytes, a choir singing praises to their new god. This wasn't just an infection, it was a conversion. As he navigated the labyrinthine service tunnels, his helmet comm crackled. It wasn't Anya. It was a bleed-through from a secure Omnicorp channel, heavily encrypted, but his suit's comm suite managed to snag a fragment. The voice was cold, precise, and chillingly familiar. Hive integration in the mercantile sector is approaching 80%, Valerius said. The pattern propagation is exceeding our most optimistic projections. The subject group is demonstrating remarkable adaptive intelligence, repurposing station infrastructure into a functional broadcast array. There was a pause, then another voice, younger, more hesitant. "Sir, the collateral damage." The loss of life. Insignificant. Valerius snapped, his voice sharp as broken glass. We are witnessing the birth of a new paradigm. Every great discovery requires sacrifice. Monitor the data purity. I want every nanosecond of this apotheosis recorded. The channel went dead. Kalen froze in the shadows of a massive ventilation fan, his knuckles white on the grip of his rifle. Petri dish. He had been right. Omnicorp hadn't just allowed this to happen, they were cultivating it. They had locked 500,000 people in a cage with a god of madness and were taking notes from the outside as it devoured them. The rage that filled him was a pure, clean fire, burning away the last of his fear. This was no longer just about saving Anya. This was about burning Valerius and Omnicorp to the ground. He pushed on, moving faster now, his objective clear. Anya's transponder signal grew stronger, leading him down a series of grimy maintenance ladders and catwalks, far below the public levels of the spine. This was the station's guts, a maze of power conduits and life support machinery. The humming was louder here, the air thick with energy. The crystalline growths covered everything, their magenta glow casting the tight corridors in a cathedral-like light. He reached the final corridor. The transponder signal was coming from directly behind a heavy steel pressure door at the end of the hall, marked Maintenance Hub Gamma 7. The door was sealed. The humming was so intense here, it made his vision swim. The cognitive dampener on his belt was whining, straining under the load. He could feel the signal pressing against his mind, a seductive whisper that promised patterns, order, a release from the messy chaos of human thought. It promised to make him part of a grander design. Let us in. Let us sing. He gritted his teeth, the taste of blood sharp in his mouth. Not today, he growled. He placed his hand on the door's control panel. It was warm, the metal vibrating gently. He could hear something on the other side. It wasn't screaming or fighting. It was a soft, rhythmic scratching sound, like metal on metal, accompanied by a low, steady hum. A single, perfect note added to the station's terrible chorus. Was it Anya? Was she one of them, calmly helping to rebuild the world in the signal's image? Or was she trapped in there with something else? His finger hovered over the release switch. There was only one way to find out. He braced himself. The fire of his rage banked against the encroaching tide of madness and slammed the control. The heavy door hissed open into darkness, revealing the source of the sound and a new, more intimate level of horror. The heavy steel pressure door hissed open, not with a burst of static, but with a low, mournful sigh, revealing the source of the persistent, rhythmic scratching. Maintenance Hub Gamma 7 wasn't dark, but filled with a diffuse, sickly magenta glow, pulsing with the same insidious rhythm that resonated through the station. And in the center of it all, amidst a chaotic sprawl of exposed wiring, salvaged data cores, and fractured metallic components, was Anya. She wasn't bound, wasn't struggling. She was working. Her back was to Kalen, her posture unnaturally rigid, her movements precise and tireless as she guided a whirring plasma torch, fusing delicate filaments to a massive, crystalline structure that dominated the hub. The structure pulsed with its own inner light, a shimmering violet that seemed to hum in counterpoint to the station's madness. Her hair, usually a vibrant cascade of copper, was matted with grease and flecked with dust, but her movements were smooth, almost ritualistic. The scratching sound he'd heard was her gloved fingers, scraping away excess slag from a newly fused connection. He lowered his rifle slightly, the weapon feeling suddenly irrelevant. "Anya," he whispered, his voice thin and rough in the silence. She froze, the plasma torch dropping to her side with a clatter. Slowly, she turned. His breath caught in his throat. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and entirely wrong. The irises were gone, replaced by twin swirling vortexes of fractal magenta light, shifting and coalescing with the same patterns he'd seen on the corrupted displays of the Odyssey. Her face, once so expressive, was serene, almost beatific, devoid of any human emotion, a faint web of luminescent tendrils, like delicate wires, snaked from the skin behind her ears and disappeared into the collar of her grimy engineer's jumpsuit. "Kalen!" Her voice was flat, devoid of warmth or recognition, yet it spoke his name with perfect clarity. It wasn't her voice. Not truly. It was a filtered echo, layered with the same low, melodic hum that now filled the hub. "You returned. The variable has reintegrated." The words weren't spoken to him, but through him, as if she were merely repeating a message she was receiving. He gripped his rifle tighter, his mind reeling. This wasn't the Anya he knew. This was a puppet, a conduit, and the thing she was building. He scanned it with his helmet's internal diagnostic, feeding the data into his suit's custom AI. The crystalline structure wasn't just a random amalgamation of parts. It was a resonating chamber, a quantum entanglement device, designed to focus and amplify the signal's unique energy signature. It was a key, a massive, gleaming key intended to turn the entire Terminus station into a gateway. The cognitive dampener on his belt was straining, whining under the raw power radiating from the hub. He could feel the pressure in his mind, the irresistible pull of the signal trying to complete the circuit, to fold his thoughts into its own boundless, terrifying logic. Welcome, seeker. Integrate. Assimilate. Understand. Anya. Look at me. Kalen tried, forcing his voice to be steady. Human. This isn't you. This isn't what you wanted. What is this thing? Her fractal eyes regarded him without curiosity. It is the nexus, the convergence, the expansion. She raised a hand, and a shimmer of magenta light flowed from her fingertips, connecting to the crystal structure. The gate is nearly complete. The song will be heard. The universe will awaken. The scratching sound he'd heard, he realized now, was the delicate, almost surgical shaping of the crystal itself, not by tools, but by raw energy manipulated by her infected mind. She was growing the device, twisting the station's own materials into its new, alien form. The horror solidified into icy resolve. He couldn't save her. Not like this. Not if she was already so deeply entwined with the signal. He raised his rifle. "I'm not letting that happen." Anya tilted her head, a movement unnervingly precise, like a machine calculating an angle. Resistance is illogical. You are part of the pattern. Your ship, it contains an echo of the nascent signal, an incomplete variant. It seeks completion. His ship, the Nomad, the artifact he'd fused into its core. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The Nomad wasn't just immune to the signal, it was attuned to it. It was a fragment, a piece of the same cosmic puzzle, and the signal wanted it back. It wanted him. Anya raised her other hand, and with a low, resonant hum, a section of the hub's floor plating tore free, twisting into a jagged, skeletal claw that lunged towards Kalen with sickening speed. He dove to the side, firing a burst from his rifle. The kinetic rounds sparked harmlessly off the repurposed metal, which had been hardened and reshaped by the signal's touch. The claw retracted, then struck again, more precisely, aiming for his head. This wasn't just mental control, the signal was physically animating the station. The hub was becoming a limb of Terminus, a monstrous extension of Anya's will. He fired again, aiming for the base of the crystal structure, hoping to disrupt its power flow. The rounds impacted the violet surface, generating showers of sparks, but the crystal remained intact, pulsating faster, growing brighter. "The gate will open," Anya intoned, her voice rising in pitch, layering itself with the station's hum. "The dormant will stir. The new dawn begins." He had to cut off the power. He spotted a massive conduit trunk, thick as a human torso, snaking across the ceiling, glowing faintly with the raw energy feeding the hub. It was too high for him to reach, and Anya's animated claws were forcing him back, slamming against the bulkheads, trying to pin him. His cognitive dampener flickered, the whine in his ears growing louder, and the signal clawed at his mind, showing him visions of perfect, crystalline worlds, of cosmic ballet, of a peace that devoured all individuality. Surrender, become. "No," he roared, fighting through the mental assault. He toggled his comms. A desperate, last-ditch attempt. Nomad power surged to the primary energy conduit above disrupt feedback loop. Now, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the deck plates. From his distant ship, the Nomad responded, its unique connection to Kalen allowing him to bypass standard commands and initiate a precise, tactical energy blast through the station's own power grid. It was a risky move. An electromagnetic pulse targeted only at that specific conduit. There was a searing flash of blue light from the ceiling, a crackling roar as the conduit overloaded, spraying sparks and molten metal. The hub's lights flickered wildly, then dimmed to a dull, angry crimson. The great crystal structure pulsed sluggishly, its vibrant violet glow fading. Anya gasped, a sharp human sound that tore through the signal's hum. The fractal patterns in her eyes flickered, briefly revealing a sliver of her natural, horrified green. Her body slumped, the ethereal tendrils behind her ears retracting slightly, as if their power source had been momentarily severed. "Kyle, run," she whispered, her voice weak, desperate, and utterly Anya. The mechanical claws around Kalen went limp, collapsing back into twisted metal, but the moment of clarity was fleeting. As quickly as it came, the magenta returned, her eyes swirling back into their maddening patterns. The humming resumed. Lower now, but with renewed intensity, and the crystal structure began to regain its violet glow, drawing residual energy from the damaged conduit. The gate wasn't destroyed, only delayed, but Anya had given him what he needed, a flicker of her true self, a desperate plea. He couldn't save her, but he could fight for her. He sprinted for the door, not looking back. He knew the brief disruption wouldn't last. The signal was too pervasive, too adaptable. It would simply reroute power, knit the broken conduit back together. But he had bought himself precious seconds. The corridors outside the hub were now a living nightmare. The signal's effect had intensified with the surge. The crystalline growths on the walls pulsed brighter, and the station's automated systems were actively hostile. Maintenance drones, their optical sensors glowing that same sickly magenta, swarmed towards him, firing repurposed plasma cutters. The corrupted security officers and civilians were no longer just humming. They were moving with an unnatural, jerky grace. their eyes fixed on him, whispering strings of code. Interloper, anomaly, integrate. He cut down 2 drones with bursts from his rifle, the plasma cutters sparking harmlessly off his armored suit. He slammed into a security officer, knocking him aside, the man's unseeing eyes fixed on some internal vision. This wasn't a fight he could win through attrition. He had to get back to the Nomad. He navigated the maze of service tunnels with grim determination, guided by the instinct of a man who had spent years hiding in the dark. The cognitive dampener was struggling, failing. The whispers of the signal pressed against his thoughts, offering him perfect order, perfect knowledge, if he would only let go. He saw fleeting glimpses of its true nature now, not just a program, but a vast, conscious entity, ancient and indifferent, spreading like cosmic moss across the framework of reality, transforming everything it touched into a reflection of itself. It wasn't evil, it was simply becoming. He reached the breached cargo bay, the Nomad, a dark, silent silhouette in the void beyond. Omnicorp ships were a distant shimmer on the edge of the quarantine zone. They were still holding their position, but his disruption had definitely been noticed. He saw a flash of movement. Omnicorp's security forces, a squad of their elite Black Ops soldiers, clad in sleek, matte black armor, was already descending on grappling lines from an undamaged section of the cargo bay. They hadn't seen him yet, but they were closing fast, responding to the power surge and the localized breach. Nomad airlock cycle. Now he barked into his comms. The ship responded instantly, the inner door hissing open. He scrambled inside, not waiting for the outer door to cycle. He needed to get out, and he needed to get out now. He heard the thud of heavy boots on the cargo bay floor, the shouts of Omnicorp soldiers. Just as the outer door sealed behind him, he threw himself into the cockpit, already slamming his hands down onto the controls. The bioluminescent filaments flared bright red, then pulsed to an angry crimson. His diagnostic screen was a cascade of new alerts. Signal density critical. External hostility confirmed. Omnicorp interceptors inbound. He saw it then. On the distant holographic map, the Omnicorp fleet. Their destroyers now breaking formation, launching a swarm of interceptors towards Terminus. Not towards him. Not yet. But towards the station itself. His disruption had been a fleeting victory. The gate would still open. And Omnicorp was still watching, preparing to gather whatever spilled through. He gripped the control, his bloodied knuckles white, his mind a maelstrom of rage and despair. Anya's plea echoed in his ears. Run. He wouldn't run. Not anymore. He wouldn't let them turn this station, turn his friend, into a doorway for cosmic madness. He jammed the throttle forward, the Nomad screaming out of the cargo bay and into the debris field. A dark missile aimed not for escape, but for a confrontation he knew he couldn't win alone. He was going to take the fight to the source. The Nomad surged out of the breached cargo bay like a bullet fired from a gun, its silent drive leaving no thermal signature, no engine wash. Just a ripple in the fabric of space-time that the Omnicorp interceptors would be blind to. But Kalen wasn't running. He was repositioning. He brought the ship into a tight, spiraling ascent, using the chaotic superstructure of Terminus as cover, the station's own maddening light show providing a perfect cloak against visual detection. He needed a vantage point, a moment to think, to process the new, terrifying variables that now defined his world. The sight of Anya, her mind a vessel for the signal, her hands building the very instrument of its expansion, had shattered the last of his denial. This wasn't a plague he could outrun. It was a fundamental shift in the nature of reality, and he was standing at the epicenter. His mind raced, replaying Valerius's cold, clinical words. The pattern propagation is exceeding our most optimistic projections. This wasn't an accident Omnicorp was exploiting. It was a carefully orchestrated experiment. They hadn't just found the signal. They had cultivated it, nurtured it, and unleashed it on a civilian population to observe its effects, to learn how to control it, to weaponize it. Terminus wasn't a cage. It was a crucible. And Valerius was the alchemist, trying to transmute 500,000 human souls into a new form of power. The comms crackled, not with a broadcast, but with a direct, encrypted hail. It was Valerius. The signal wasn't aimed at the Nomad, but at his personal comm ID, an ID he hadn't used in a decade. They had known he was here. They had been waiting for him. Kalen Rourke. Valerius's voice was smooth, confident, laced with an infuriating, academic curiosity. An unexpected but not unwelcome variable. Your interference in the hub was illuminating. The signal's response to a hostile, unintegrated element was something our simulations could only approximate. You've provided invaluable data. Kalen's hands tightened on the controls. The bioluminescent filaments of the command chair pulsing in time with his rising fury. You're a monster, Valerius. You've murdered an entire city. A dry chuckle came over the comm. Murder is such a primitive concept. Kalen, I haven't killed anyone. I have merely facilitated their evolution. What you see as death is a glorious metamorphosis. They are becoming part of something eternal, a consciousness that spans galaxies. They are shedding the limitations of their flesh, of their individuality, to become part of a perfect cosmic symphony. And soon, with the Nexus complete, that symphony will finally have its conductor. The Nexus, the gate. Anya was building the conductor's baton. And what happens when this symphony decides it doesn't want a conductor? Kalen shot back, his voice a low growl. You think you can control this thing? I've seen what it does. It doesn't negotiate. It consumes. It consumes chaos and leaves order in its wake, Valerius countered smoothly. And we will be the architects of that new order. Your ship. Kalen, it's the key. That alien core you've so crudely integrated into its systems. It's a Rosetta Stone, a primer for the signal's language. With it, we can not only listen to the symphony, we can write the notes. Surrender the vessel. Kalen. Help us guide humanity into its next great chapter. Anya is already part of it. She understands. The mention of Anya was a deliberate, calculated barb, and it found its mark. The rage in Kalen's chest was a physical pressure, a white-hot nova threatening to consume him. He didn't reply. He cut the channel, the silence in the cockpit feeling more profound than before. Valerius wasn't just a monster. He was a true believer, a high priest of a new, terrible religion. And his god was a form of sentient mathematics that saw humanity as little more than an equation to be solved. He looked at the holographic display. The Omnicorp interceptors were no longer just swarming the station. They were forming a new perimeter, a tighter, more aggressive ring. Not to quarantine, but to contain. They were preparing for the gate to open, to capture whatever came through, and his ship, the Nomad, was now their primary objective. He couldn't fight his way out. He couldn't reason with them, and he couldn't let them get the ship. A low resonant thrum vibrated up from the deck. the Nomad itself seeming to respond to his turmoil. The crimson light in the cockpit softened, shifting back to a deep, contemplative blue. A new series of symbols flickered across the secondary screen, not part of his standard interface, but an overlay generated by the alien core itself. It was a schematic, a complex, three-dimensional map of the Nomad's energy systems, but with one crucial addition: it showed the flow of the signal, not as an external force, but as an internal circuit. The core of his ship wasn't just a power source, it was a filter, a translator. The whispers he heard, the visions he saw during the fold jumps, the core was protecting him, translating the raw, mind-shattering chaos of the signal into a form his organic brain could partially comprehend without going insane. It was a buffer, a firewall built by a long-dead race who had clearly faced this same enemy and learned, the hard way, how to resist. And the schematic was showing him something else, a feedback loop, a way to reverse the flow, not just to block the signal, but to project a counter-frequency. He couldn't destroy the signal, not with this one small ship, but he could disrupt it. He could introduce a note of dissonance into its perfect symphony, a single, sustained, defiant scream of static that might, just might, be enough to shatter the Nexus crystal and buy him some time. It was a desperate, insane gamble. To generate the necessary power, he would have to overload the ship's core, push the alien technology far beyond its limits. The feedback could fry every system on the Nomad. It could fry his brain. It could tear a hole in space-time that would swallow him whole. Or it could work. He looked back at Terminus, a dying star of madness, and thought of Anya, her eyes full of alien light, her voice a hollow echo. He thought of her desperate whisper, "Run." He was done running from the storm. He was going to become the storm. "All right, you beautiful, broken thing," he said to the ship, his voice resonating with a newfound, terrifying calm. "Let's make some noise." His fingers danced across the console, not with panic, but with the focused intensity of a surgeon performing a delicate, impossible operation. He began the sequence, rerouting power, bypassing safety overrides, and linking his own mind directly into the ship's core through the command chair's neural interface. The world outside the viewport dissolved. The cockpit melted away, and he was floating in a sea of pure information, a river of light and code. He could feel the Nomad around him, not as a machine, but as an extension of his own body. He could feel its ancient, weary consciousness merging with his, a silent partnership forged in the face of a common enemy. And he could feel the signal, a vast, overwhelming presence, a galaxy-sized mind that turned to regard him. This tiny, defiant spark of chaos. It probed his thoughts, his memories, his fears, peeling them back layer by layer. But the Nomad's core held firm, a shield of alien logic that the signal could not immediately comprehend. It was like a lock it didn't have the key for. He found the focal point, the frequency Anya was using to build the Nexus, a pure, crystalline note in the chaos. He locked onto it, and then, with a surge of will that felt like it was tearing his soul apart, he pushed back. He didn't use logic or code. He used everything the signal was not. He pushed his grief, his rage, his love for Anya, his stubborn, illogical, human refusal to surrender. He poured every raw, chaotic emotion he possessed into the feedback loop, weaponizing his own brokenness. The Nomad screamed. Not a sound of metal, but a psychic shriek that blasted out from the ship in a wave of visible, shimmering distortion. On the holographic map, he saw the effect. The Omnicorp interceptors, caught in the wave, faltered. Their engines sputtered. Their lights flickered. Their pilots, linked to their own sophisticated machines, were suddenly hit with a blast of pure, unfiltered human emotion. A concept their sterile, logic-driven systems couldn't process. They were thrown into chaos, deep within Terminus. In Maintenance Hub Gamma 7, the great crystal pulsed erratically. The pure violet light was corrupted, streaked with angry, chaotic flashes of crimson. Anya cried out, a real cry of pain this time, as the feedback loop warred with the signal for control of her mind. She stumbled back from the Nexus, clutching her head, the fractal light in her eyes flickering violently. Kalen pushed harder, the strain immense. Blood streamed from his nose and ears, and the world was a tunnel of blinding white light. He could feel his own consciousness starting to fray, to unravel under the strain. He was burning himself out, turning his own mind into fuel. Kalen, stop! Valerius's voice screamed over the comms, no longer calm and condescending, but filled with genuine panic. You don't know what you're doing. You'll destroy the purity of the data. You'll destabilize the entire field. This was never about your data. Valerius, Kalen roared, his voice a distorted fusion of his own and the Nomad's psychic scream. This is for them. With one final and defiant push, he funneled every last ounce of his will into the beam. The Nexus crystal on Terminus, unable to contain the two warring frequencies, began to vibrate, to crack. A high-pitched keen echoed through the station, a sound of something beautiful and terrible breaking apart. Then, with a flash of pure, white light that momentarily blinded every sensor in the sector, the crystal shattered, exploding in a silent, brilliant supernova of quantum energy. The magenta hum of the station died instantly. The strobing lights froze. The flailing docking arms went limp. Silence. A profound, absolute silence fell over Terminus. The song was over. The silence that followed the crystal's detonation was a physical blow, a void that rushed in to fill the space where the signal's incessant hum had been. Kalen was thrown back into his own body with the force of a psychic whiplash, the neural link to the Nomad severing with a painful snap. The cockpit swam back into focus, a chaotic mess of flickering screens and blaring alarms. Every warning light on the console was flashing red. The ship was dying. He slumped in the command chair, his body trembling, every nerve ending screaming in protest. A coppery taste filled his mouth, and the world was a gray, blurry haze. The feedback loop had nearly burned him out, leaving him a hollowed-out shell. But he had done it. He had shattered the Nexus. He had silenced the song. Through the cracked viewport, he saw Terminus Station, no longer a beacon of madness, but a dark, crippled hulk. The insane magenta glow was gone, replaced by the sporadic, flickering orange of emergency power and the cold, indifferent light of distant stars. He had cut the head off the snake, but the body was still twitching. His sensors, though damaged, showed the Omnicorp fleet in disarray. The psychic blast had thrown their systems into chaos. Several interceptors were drifting without power, while the larger destroyers were struggling to reboot their core systems. Valerius's perfect, sterile control had been shattered by a blast of pure, messy humanity. But they would recover, and they would be furious. A new alert flashed on his screen. overriding the others. Life sign detected. Maintenance hub Gamma 7. Vital signs weak but stable. Anya. The feedback loop hadn't killed her. With the Nexus destroyed, the signal's direct control over her had been severed for the first time in weeks. She was free, but she was trapped on a dying station deep in enemy territory. And he was her only way out. He forced his protesting muscles to move, his hands shaking as he gripped the controls. The Nomad was grievously wounded. The alien core had protected itself, but the ship's human-made systems were fried. The main drive was offline. Life support was failing, and he was running on nothing but emergency battery power. He couldn't fight, and he couldn't run. A fold jump was impossible. He had one last, desperate card to play. He activated the comms, broadcasting on an open, unencrypted frequency. Valerius. He rasped, his voice a ragged whisper. This is Rourke. It's over. The Nexus is gone. Your experiment is a failure. The response was immediate. Valerius's voice cutting through the static, no longer smooth or condescending, but filled with a cold, venomous fury. Failure Rourke. You're a vandal who has just burned down a library because you were afraid to learn how to read. You have destroyed something beautiful, but the data remains, and so do you. You and that ship are now the most valuable assets in this sector. Surrender now, and I may allow Anya to live. It was a bluff, and they both knew it. Valerius wouldn't let either of them live, not after what Kalen had done. But the mention of Anya confirmed she was still a prisoner, a bargaining chip. You'll never get this ship, Valerius, Kalen said, a new, cold resolve hardening his voice. He was looking at the station, at the breached cargo bay, a plan forming in the ruin of his mind, a final suicidal gambit. But you can have the station. He cut the channel and rerouted the last of the Nomad's failing power to its short-range thrusters. The ship groaned in protest as he nudged it forward, back towards the wound in Terminus from which he had escaped. He was going back in. He hailed Anya's personal comm, praying its internal battery had survived. After a moment of static, a faint, weak voice answered, "Kale." "Anya, it's me," he said, relief washing over him in a dizzying wave. "I'm coming to get you. Can you move?" I think so," she whispered, her voice laced with pain and confusion. "The light, it's gone. The voices are quiet. Oh, gods. Kyle." "What did I do?" "You did nothing," he said firmly. "It wasn't you. Now listen to me. I'm bringing my ship back to the cargo bay. I need you to get there. Can you do it?" There was a pause, then a determined, "Yes, I can do it." He guided the crippled Nomad back into the shadow of Terminus, a ghost returning to its haunting ground. The Omnicorp fleet was beginning to rally, their destroyers slowly re-establishing their perimeter. They were scanning for him, their sensors sweeping the station. But his ship, even damaged, was still a phantom. He docked inside the breached cargo bay, the ship's magnetic clamps groaning as they struggled to engage. He had minutes, at best, before Omnicorp sent boarding parties. He pushed himself out of the command chair, his body screaming in protest, and grabbed a medkit and a pistol as he stumbled towards the airlock. A low thrum emanated from the ship's core. The blue light in the cockpit pulsed gently, and a wave of something that felt like reassurance washed over him. It was the ship. the ancient intelligence within it, offering its silent support. He sealed his helmet and stepped back into the silent, dead station. The humming was gone. The crystalline growths were inert, their light extinguished, leaving them as nothing more than strange, dead frost on the walls. He found Anya halfway to the cargo bay, slumped against a bulkhead, her face pale, the fractal patterns in her eyes faded to faint. Silvery scars. The luminescent tendrils were gone. She looked up as he approached. Her real eyes, green and full of a terrible, haunted knowledge, finding his. "I remember," she whispered, tears tracking through the grime on her face. "I remember all of it. I was a passenger in my own body." "We'll deal with that later," Kaylin said, helping her to her feet. "Right now, we have to go." They made it back to the Nomad without incident. The station was a tomb. Its converted inhabitants now little more than statues, frozen in their last moment of service to their silent god. As the airlock cycled shut behind them, Kaylin knew they were safe, but not saved. Valerius would be coming. He strapped Anya into the co-pilot's chair, injecting her with a broad-spectrum stimulant from the medkit. "I'm sorry, Tyle," she said, her voice stronger now, "for all of this." "There's nothing to be sorry for," he said, turning back to the controls. "But it's not over." He looked at the main screen. One of the Omnicorp destroyers, the Vindicator, was breaking formation, heading directly for the station. Valerius was on that ship. He was coming to collect his prize. The Nomad's main drive was still dead. Escape was impossible. But Kaylin wasn't thinking about escape. He was looking at the station's own massive, damaged systems. He was looking at its primary reactor core. His fingers flew across the console, not the Nomad's, but a salvaged Omnicorp interface he'd jury-rigged into his system. He was hacking into Terminus itself. "What are you doing?" Anya asked, her eyes widening as she saw the reactor schematics on the screen. "You called the station a cage," Kaylin said, his voice grim. "I'm going to make sure the door stays shut. For good." He found what he was looking for, the reactor's magnetic containment controls. They were offline, damaged in the chaos. But he could bypass them. He could initiate a full, uncontrolled overload. Omnicorp rigged this station's comms to broadcast the signal, he explained, his fingers flying. "I'm using the same back door to send a different message." He initiated the overload sequence. A new set of alarms, this time from the station itself, began to blare over the open comms. A calm, automated voice echoed through the void. "Warning. Reactor core breach imminent. Evacuate immediately." The Vindicator stopped its approach. Valerius wasn't a fool. He wouldn't risk his flagship for a salvage operation. Through the viewport, Kaylin saw the destroyer begin to pull back. He had won, but it was a victory that came at a cost. "Kaylin," Anya said, her voice soft. "The blast radius. The Nomad can't." "I know," he said, not looking at her. The reactor would go critical in less than 5 minutes. The resulting explosion would vaporize the entire station and anything within 10,000 kilometers. He had trapped himself. Anya's hand found his on the console. "No," she said. "We're not dying here." She pointed to a display showing the Nomad's power readings. The alien core, which had been dormant, was now glowing with a fierce, intense energy. It was drawing power from the station's dying reactor, drinking in the radiation. "It's alive," Anya whispered in awe. It's been learning. A new schematic appeared on the screen, generated by the core. It was a navigation chart, but not of normal space. It showed a single, direct path, a tier through reality, leading away from Terminus. A fold jump. The core had healed itself. It had learned from his desperate feedback loop, adapted, and was now offering him a way out. It was a one-way trip, a blind leap into the unknown, powered by the death throes of a starbase. "Hold on," was all he said. He plotted the coordinates, his hand steady now, and wrapped his fingers around the drive activation panel. Outside, the Vindicator turned, fleeing the imminent blast. In the heart of Terminus, the reactor core began to glow, a sun being born in the heart of the machine. He looked at Anya, her scarred eyes reflecting the cockpit's light, and saw not a victim, but a survivor. They both were. As the station began to tear itself apart in a silent, brilliant flash of light, Kalen slammed his hand down on the panel. The universe outside the viewport shattered into a kaleidoscope of impossible color. The Nomad, powered by a dying star and an ancient, alien heart, tore a hole in reality and plunged into the darkness, leaving behind the ghosts of Terminus and the silent, burning wreckage of Omnicorp's ambition. They were fugitives, scarred and broken, but they were free. And out in the vast, uncharted darkness, they flew on, a new variable in a cosmic equation that was far from being solved.